About 8,000 British Army troops are to take part in exercises across Eastern Europe to combat Russian aggression in one of the largest deployments since the end of the Cold War. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, announced the deployment and said that they are committed to exercises along NATO's eastern border, from Finland in the north to Macedonia in the south. He also committed many more tanks and armoured vehicles to the growing Russian aggression and the response to it. Well, joining me now to discuss that and more, I'm delighted to say, is Major General Tim Cross. Tim's a retired Ordnance Battalion commander and the officer who ran the logistics for the 1st Armoured Division in the First Gulf War. Tim, good of you to join us, and thank you. Ordnance and logistics, perfect. Are the Ukrainians getting all that they need from us and all that they need to win this war, as Zelensky says, with Russia?
Well, they're certainly getting a lot of stuff from the West in the round. Whether they're getting enough to win a war depends what you mean by win. And one of the things that worries me, I have to say, is some of the statements that are being made publicly by people about what they think it could be the outcome of this, as in pushing Russia out of Ukraine completely, including Crimea, including the eastern provinces and so on, which I think is very unlikely. We might come back to that. But overall, we have
Tim, it's so important. I had got it down as a question for later on, but you raise it now. You're referring directly to the Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary, in a major speech, said our commitment now is not only defeating Russia in its eastern incursion, but out of Ukraine altogether. That fundamentally changes the nature of the war.
It does. It does. And I'm not having a go at her in particular, because she's not the only one. And I have to say, from President Biden downwards, what I've been dismayed about in this last couple of weeks is, and I need to be careful here, I don't want to be sweepingly judgmental, but there's far too much megaphone diplomacy, grandstanding, hubris. We need to get back to some quiet statecraft and get beyond the rhetoric and begin to open up channels of communication. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we need to do anything other than support Ukraine as best we can, and to enable Ukraine to do everything they can to stop the Russian advances, and yes, indeed, to push them back. And if they can do it on their own, then maybe they can push further forward. But the trouble is that by this megaphone diplomacy and the sort of statements that are being made in the Mansion House and elsewhere, is that the Russian paranoia, which we really need to understand. Sun Tzu made a statement 2,500 years ago, which said, if you understand your enemy and you understand yourself, then you need not have the fear of the outcome of 1,000 battles. We need to understand Putin. We may not like him, but he is what he is. And Russia historically has had paranoia about being surrounded by the West and so on. So these exercises you talk about, which actually are relatively small, we can come back to that, nonetheless will play into that paranoia.
Putin also, whether it's fueled by the paranoia that you observe or whether it's an argument with his generals and his security people, but is said to be poised to switch from a special operation in Ukraine to war, quote, unquote. As a military man, Tim, what's the significance of that?
Well, for Russia, from a Russian perspective, it means he can mobilize far more capability, far more fighting power, what we call fighting power. That's the stuff and the way that you conduct these operations. And we don't need to go over the past, but there's no doubt in my mind that they genuinely believe that they would have a relatively easy move into Ukraine, as they've done elsewhere. Relatively easy. That hasn't happened. And he has got to put in more capacity, more capability. And by declaring it as a war, part of Russian military doctrine is a preparedness to use tactical nuclear weapons as part of the escalate to de-escalate. And pushing Putin, trying to push Putin out of Ukraine will only result in him putting more into ensuring that that doesn't happen. And in my view, he might well be prepared to use tactical nuclear weapons. One of the problems is we have lost an understanding of what we used to call in the good old days, in inverted commas, during the Cold War, mutually assured destruction, strategic nuclear deterrence, and the escalation process that happened. The move through conventional fighting, through conducting operations in those days in Western Germany, to a preparedness to escalate into tactical and then more operational level and then strategic nuclear exchange. And an understanding of that doctrine on both sides, with lots of academics involved, with the military certainly involved, and indeed politicians, meant that that Cold War ended in the way that it did, thankfully. Now, we need to be jolly careful that we don't end up with Putin having no alternative than to to escalate, as I say.
The final question on that, a man you know very well, also retired General Mike Jackson on this programme, about a month ago said, I always believed that even tactical nuclear weapons would not be used in my lifetime. I'm no longer so sure.
Yeah, I know General Mike extremely well. I worked with him a lot over the years, including during the Balkans and Kosovo and so on. I mean, he's an extremely capable operator, and alongside General Rupert Smith, I think probably the best operators of my military generation. I work with both of them a lot. And Mike is right. I mean, and I am not saying for 1 minute that I approve of what Putin thinks, or that I don't think we should be putting pressure on, as I say, to succeed in Ukraine. But understanding and defining what it is we hope to achieve, what is our intent, understanding Russia, understanding Putin. If we're not careful, this, as I say, megaphone diplomacy, a lack of statecraft, too much grandstanding, and too many statements all competing with each other to say that we're going to give more than you, etc., is not going to help. We need to tone down this conversation. Otherwise, Mike, and I have to say myself, will be proven to be right. And God help us if we are.
General Tim, on that sobering thought, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Major General Tim Cross there, retired British Army officer, military logistics expert, with a chilling warning.